Alright, so we're working on a 2003 Dodge Caravan today, Grand Caravan. And you can ignore, I don't know if you can even see it in the picture right now. I have the brakes and stuff off. I'm doing some other work to it. But we have a loose inner tie rod on this thing. It's pretty, the wheels makes when you move your wheel side to side when it's jacked up, you got pretty good movement in it. And the outer tie rod is not the greatest either, so I'm going to go ahead and replace both of them. Fairly cheap. It's not worth changing one without the other, really. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I already took the 18mm nut off the tie rod on the bottom here, and we're not going to reuse this tie rod. But if you take a hammer and strike it right here on the side, see if I can get you back up a little bit here. Anyway, if you take a hammer and strike it right here on the side, or if you have a tie rod remover tool, and if you're not going to reuse the tie rod, it's not a big deal, but go ahead and strike it right here. That'll pop it loose like this. I just hit it a couple times. Now on these, some people measure, they make measurements. I just count the turns. I've never had a problem doing this a long time. I've never had a problem just counting the turns on it. So what you want to do before you take this off actually is knock this 22mm nut loose. That's what holds the tie rod, fastens it down on the other end. So you'll knock that loose, and then what I do is I just count the turns of the tie rod coming off. So I'll just kind of hold it off here, and you're going to want to hold the inner tie rod. And if it's rusty, you might have to get something to usually if you get it going a couple turns, it'll start turning by hand. Right now this one, it's not going to turn by hand, so I'm going to have to get something to hold it. Hold the inner tie rod so it doesn't spin, and then we'll turn this tie rod off. And all I'm going to do is just count the turns off, and then when I get the new one, and after I install the inner tie rod, I'll just count the turns back on. He's going to alignment after this anyway, but it'll be pretty much dead on where it was at if you count the turns. So, but that's the reason why it's here anyway, because he wants to get alignment on. And you can see, I don't know if you can see it, but you might be able to hear it. It's kind of knocking it loose on the inner tie rod. So I've already taken the boot off on the inner tie rod, the bellow kit, the bellow boot. I haven't taken it off, but I've loosened it. And all that is you got one clamp here in the front that goes on the front of the bellow here. Just take a pair of pliers, whatever we have, take that off. And then on the back you have one of those band clamps that should look like this, and you have to jack it up and get under there. And this kind of clamp here is what holds the back of the bellow or the boot to the rack. Kind of looks like this. And what I do is I just take a pair of, you can't reuse this once it's snapped in, so I just take a pair of side cutters or dikes, and you just grab it right there like this and squeeze on it real hard, and that usually breaks it off and allows it to come off. So that's off, and so the bellow will actually slide forward now once I get under there and pull it forward. So after you don't have to do that now, but that's the way I did it. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get something to hold this inner tie rod tight while I turn off the outer tie rod. I'll count the turns, and then we'll slide that bellow off and get the inner tie rod out. So I'm going to go do that real quick off camera. I'll hold the inner tie rod with something and just count the turns, and then we'll go after that inner tie rod, which is what we're after. And you can see here, this one's pretty loose. It's not, I wouldn't say it's dire to change it, but I think like $20, so there's no point. And it is loose. It's got a lot of wear on it, so it's not like it's not a waste of money. So and then most people would tell you to change both inner tie rods if you're doing it. The other side is tight, and that's up to you and what kind of money you want to spend, your budget and all that. But for sure this side needs to be fixed, so we're going to go after this side. So I'll be right back. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 18. Alright, so I was 22 turns off up here. So, you know, I started out like this with it facing down, and then one full turn would be facing down again, obviously. Not to make it oversimple, but if you haven't done it, that's just how I do it. So it's 22 turns off, which is Joey Logano's number, so that's how I remember it since I'm a NASCAR fan. So now we got to pull this nut off because we're going to pull that bellows off, the boot kit, or the boot, so and this clamp, so it won't come off. The bevel is real small on the front here, so you have to have this nut completely off to do it. So I need to get a 22 millimeter deep well, and then we'll hopefully zip it off. Riley's running a little bit slow today. I ordered the parts about an hour and a half ago and they're still not here. I don't know what the deal is. It's just the way it is sometimes. So obviously it's easier if you have an impact or some kind of power tool. And this one spun pretty easily off, so I don't think it's going to give me any trouble coming off. So that's just the nut and the clamp. Alright, so I got you off the tripod. I know it's a little more shaky when I do that, but I wanted to show you what's going on here. So I pulled the bellows kit off, or the boot kit off. It's right there. Now it's rolling away from me. Right there. So all we got left now is to get this inner tie rod off, and I'm going to try to show you what's going on with it. If I can get my hand in there. Of course I can't get my hand in there and hold it. Sorry about this. I don't know if you can see that that in and out movement of it. There shouldn't be any movement at all like that going on with it, and you can hear it knocking too. So there's a special tool to get these off. You can use whatever you have if you don't have the special tool. I'm just going to go ahead and use a special tool. But with this van here, it's pretty easy access. There's a big open area right here to get to the tie rod here. So you could actually use whatever you have available to you, a big pair of vice grips or whatever, and break this loose. But like I said, I'm going to go ahead and use the tool that I've had for the last probably 25 years or so, and use that. So I'll show you that, and then we'll... Alright, so this is the tool I use. I've had this thing forever. I think it's a KD tool. And all it has a end for to put your ratchet on one end, and then the other end is basically just basically a long shallow or hollow pipe. And it's got a flat end right here to grab one side of the tie rod, and then you just screw this in, this bolt in, and it grabs the other tie rod. This one works really well for the majority of your tie rods. Now if you have one that's real tight in there, I've had some, I can't remember the makes that I've done. I've got a couple different tools, but this one works good for these Chryslers. Man, I just did one the other day where this didn't work. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, this will work on the majority of them. The auto parts stores probably rent these out. So all you do is just slide this in there, get it over the tie rod, and then you just turn that bolt down until it's tight against the tie rod. And then we'll just put the ratchet in here, and I'm going to have to move you out of the way to get my arm in there and my leg and tighten down, but you get the drift. You just pull this in right where the end of the tie rod is. Now you can go past it and then not hit it, so you want to get right where that the bolt part of the tie rod is, and get it up over there and tighten that nut down, or that bolt down on top of it, and then that'll grab it, and then we can loosen it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick off camera. Alright, so I just slid that over there, and then I locked down that retaining bolt on the tie rod, and then you just take it and loosen it. Once you get it broke loose, you can just take it out. Now you don't have to count the turns on this or anything. These just go down until they're tight. There's no adjustment on the inner tie rod. And then should come out like this. Now a lot of times you don't have to take a wrench and tighten this down if it has you know, flat surfaces on the tie rod itself, but this one is just circular all the way around, My guess is the new one's probably going to have the wrench indentations for it. But if you rent one of these or have one of these, most of the time you can just turn this down on a flat spot and then it'll hold it. But this particular tie rod does not have any flat spots on it. It's perfectly smooth all the way around. So in that case, you'd have to take that retaining bolt and just screw it down on there until it's pretty tight, and then it'll come loose. These usually aren't super tight. And like I said, if you don't have that tool, and with this Caravan, especially with the access you have, you could probably get a big pair of vice grips or channel locks, something on there, and break this loose. But since I have the right tools, I would use them, you know. And if you don't, it'd still be better putting it back on. Now, putting it back on, it may have the wrench faces, the wrench, you know, to put a wrench on it and tighten it back up. So I don't know. I don't have the parts yet still, so I guess I'm going to call them and find out what's going on, and then we'll pick this back up. Alright, so we finally got the new one, so we'll go ahead and transfer this spacer over and just screw it in we'll start it by hand, and then we'll put the tool on it and finish up the torque on it. So you have to take your nut off that it comes with it to get your bellow back on, or your boot. So be aware of that. And then what I like to do, I did not buy a new bellow or boot for this, so what I'm going to do before I put it on is I'm going to fill it with some grease. It's got grease in it, of course, but I'm going to go ahead and refill it with some more grease and slide it on. But before I do that, I'm going to put my tool on and torque it down, get it pretty tight, and then we'll slide that bellow. Alright, I wanted to show you this too. I didn't use this tool, but I wanted to show you. This is another one of those tie rod tools. It kind of looks like an exhaust clamp, and it's got a spot here for your ratchet, or yeah, your ratchet. And it's got kind of some grooves in here that'll grab a hold of the smooth end on the tie rod. And you just tighten these nuts down, and that will allow you to torque it down too. It's another tool that they have. Either one will work. This one would probably actually be better for the smoother tie rods. So I went ahead and torqued it down, put the boot back on, and if you remember correctly, it had this band tight clamp on there. Kind of looks like this. Now once you take, this is a one-use clamp, so once you break it, it's over. So you can either pick up another one at the auto parts store, or believe it or not, most of the new bellow kits come with big zip ties, and that's all they use. It's not a real. It really shouldn't be putting, you know, a lot of pressure on it or be pulled on real tight. It's basically just on there to keep dust and dirt out. And anyway, so that's usually what I use. I have some pretty good heavy zip ties that I use, and you can either go to the auto parts store and try to find this clamp, or use that. Like I said, most of the new bellows kits come with heavy duty zip ties. So once you got your bellow back on, now my front clamp I replaced with a worn clamp because it was wore out and jacked up. This is the clamp here, and it's just it's kind of bent and weird, so I just put a regular worm clamp on there, and then you put your nut on that came with it, and then now we can screw your tie rod back in. If you remember correctly, this one had 22 turns, so I'm just going to go ahead and get the new tie rod out of the box, and then we'll screw this on. Alright, so I screwed that on, 22 turns, went ahead and took the jam nut, and I haven't tightened it yet, but I put it up against the tie rod, and then put the tie rod through the spindle here, or the steering knuckle, and I cinched down the bottom nut on it. It's 17 mil. It was 18 mil from the factory, if you remember. This tie rod came with a 17 millimeter nut, so they may not, aftermarket may not be the same size always as the factory. And I'm just, right now all I'm doing is you know, you put the cast nut on, run your get it torque it down, get it straight with the hole, run your cotter pin through there. This one comes with an extra little boot around it. This is the old one here, but you can see I can't get this one off. It's on there really good, but it's got the regular boot to hold the grease in. There's a little protective shield around it, so that goes on, and then we're just going to put the grease fitting in. It's usually a 8mm once you get it started, and you're going to just screw that into the top, and do not over tighten these once you get them started. Just get them to where they're a little bit snug, because you can break these off into the tie rod real easy. So just get them down there to where they're flush with the tie rod, and just make them a little bit snug, because it's very easy to break these off if you go crazy on them. So that's all I'm going to do there. And then you will have to tighten your jam nut, which was 22 from the factory, and it looks like it's 22 aftermarket. So I'm going to go ahead and tighten that down. Make sure it's good and tight. And then all you should have left is to grease your tie rod. Now the factory, you can see, doesn't have grease fitting to grease it, but if you skip this step, your tie rod won't last very long. So go ahead and get a grease gun. Hopefully you put more grease in it than you do what I'm doing. Here we go. And all you're doing is waiting for that grease boot to puff up a little bit, and you don't have to do it until the grease starts running out of the boot. That's probably too much. This one's getting really full, so this one's good now. You just want your boot down here to be puffed up and full looking, and then just go ahead and wipe off the rest of it, and you're good to go. So that's pretty much the same on either side. Tie rods, inner tie rods, outer tie rods on a Grand Caravan. So I guess that's pretty much it. Hopefully it helps you out. If you have go to get a line, they tell you need tie rods, inner tie rod. Some guys are afraid to put inners on. They're really not much harder than an outer tie rod. Just different tools to use basically. And then the bellow kit, a lot of times your bellow boot can break or crack when you take it off, or it could be cracked already before you take it off. You can get, most auto parts stores sell the bellow kit or the boot kit that goes over it. They're not that expensive. So if your kit or if your boot is questionable, just go ahead and replace it, and it'll come with new clamps and everything. But I guess that's about it. If you have any questions, leave them, just email me and leave it down below. Appreciate you watching. Hopefully we'll see you down the road on the next one, and God bless.